obscured in some way. But it's within that portion of the rest of the video we recognize is admissible and relevant, because that time frame is the incident itself. Officer Chang arrives, interacts with the two officers and Mr. Floyd as they go over. After Officer Chang comes back over to the Dragon Walk side of 38th Street, he admits in a statement he no longer sees what's going on over there. Because this is a reasonable officer standard, as we all know, what happens after the restraint and across the street on 38th is simply irrelevant to the issues at hand. So after that point in the video is where we believe it reasonably loses any relevance. After that point, of course, there's audio, and Officer Chang speaks to the two individuals that were passengers in the car, and it's just full of hearsay. And some of that would be offered to prove, we believe, the truth of the matters asserted in those statements about what happened. So it's full of hearsay after that. There is a moment where Officer Chang towards the end is standing around as the officers do some follow-up, and this court allowed video of that time period as relevant to conducting or finishing their investigation. So I see where the court might find that particular period of Officer Chang's video to have some relevance. So in that sense, we would object to that portion, really as cumulative, because of course the better video of that has already been admitted with Officer Chauvin's body cam during that time period when Officer King comes out. I believe that was the court's ruling about why that's relevant. It shows something about the intentions of their investigation. So our objections are being able to read the screen in Officer Chang's squad car if he pulls up the information about Mr. Floyd. After 1:15:35 is simply not relevant. It's full of hearsay and potentially a cumulative objection as well. Thank you.
If we were to characterize this as bystander video of the bystanders near the Dragon Walk, who were the people that Mr. Floyd was with earlier that day, or earlier before this going into the store, how is it different from the bystander videos that the state offered and played with regard to statements that were made?
And the other bystanders are part of the incident. Certainly the defense has regularly cross-examined about the tone of voice of those bystanders and their effect, apparently, on Mr. Chauvin at the scene. They are part of the incident itself. They cannot really be separated from the issues involved in the restraint and the reasonableness of it, and I fully expect that's why there was no objection to that. This is a video of across the street. In my review of the video, you can't even hear what's going on in this video until the ambulance has come and gone and one of the witnesses starts to walk this way, towards the Dragon Walk. So it does not capture the relevant interactions and portions of the incident.
Okay, Mr. Nelson?
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, I would break Mr. Chang's video into kind of three relevant sections, or three pertinent sections, I should say. The first being the initial reaction as described by Mr. Frank, the first approximate 5 minutes of the video. And then there is a period of time, a second period of time, where Officer Chang is dealing with the passengers. And then the third part of the video I would characterize as the occurrences after the ambulance has arrived and left, and what happens there. In terms of the first section, I do believe that it is relevant to the analysis. It shows another perspective of what was happening at that particular moment. I would need to figure out fairly quickly how to get that blocked, those portions of the computer screen blocked that contain information about Mr. Floyd. There's that section, and I don't think, subject to that redaction, I don't think the state apparently objects to that. The second part, I believe, is relevant because it shows another officer's reaction to what is going on. It shows other bystanders' reactions to what is going on. And you can see during that period that Officer Chang is pacing kind of back and forth, trying to split his attention between the passengers and also observing what's happening across the street. Again, in terms of the reaction to the crowd and the crowd growing more and more vociferous as time progresses. So I do think it's relevant because it shows it from a distance. It shows Officer Chang walking. It shows at scenes where people are standing on other sides of the street. It shows the traffic. It shows people slowing down and watching. There's a lot of information that can be gleaned from that segment. The third segment, I think, is also relevant because it demonstrates, again, the continuing efforts of the police and also the continuing interactions with the citizens who observed, and goes to, as is being alluded to, is that if the crowd was a distraction or the officers perceived this gathering of people, whether we want to call it a crowd or a group or whatever, whether the officers perceived that to be a risk or a threat, and how that may have continued and ultimately influenced officers' decisions. So I believe it is highly relevant. I do not believe it is hearsay in the sense of you don't hear anything, essentially very little that the officers say. The officers don't talk about what just happened over there, with one small exception relevant to Mr. Williams and Ms. Hansen. There's some comments there. I believe that part may already be in one of the other body cameras. I'd have to go back and double check. That being said, Your Honor, I don't think it's cumulative because it again shows a different perspective. It shows a reaction of another police officer and what he was doing. It shows the surroundings from a different perspective and is highly relevant to the trier of fact.
I have reviewed the entire thumb drive that contains the exhibit, and I do find that it is relevant and not cumulative to a certain point. I would note that the body cam includes video of, from a distance, what is happening in front of Cup Foods, but also the timing of when the fire engine 17 shows up. And since the emergency EMS response has been litigated in this case and is relevant as to when EMS showed up, when the fire engine showed up, firefighter Hansen specifically described how she would assume it'd be within 3 minutes. This puts that in a time frame on the EMS call, and so that is relevant. And to the extent that there are any statements made, I find they're not offered for the truth of the matter asserted, or to the extent they are, they fall into the residual exception because these are people just making comments of their observations at the scene. There's no motive for them to lie or anything else, so they would certainly be reliable. They're not inculpatory in any way. And so I think it would fall into the 807 residual hearsay, even if it is offered for the truth of the matter asserted, but it does not appear to be that the state is trying, or the defense is trying to prove the truth of the matter asserted. So with that, I'm going to order that you redact the part when the officer is looking up on the computer. I think for today's purposes, you can simply fast forward through it 30 seconds or so when he's in, when you get to that point. That way the jury won't see it when you publish it today, but it's got to be redacted. You got to take it back, and before we submit this to the jury for deliberation, it has to be taken out. So basically when he gets in the squad until when he gets back out of the squad. And I'll advise him that it's been edited to take out irrelevant materials up until the time the fire engine leaves. Anything after that is not really relevant. To some extent it is cumulative, as the state has said, but up through the time the fire engine leaves is appropriate. So with that redaction in the middle and the ending after the fire engine leaves, the body-worn cam will be admissible.
We should be able to, in about 10 minutes, accomplish that.
All right. You can actually accomplish the redaction within 10 minutes?
I would just be cutting those clips out rather than trying to put some sort of black screen on.
No, that would be my preference.
so if I can have about 10 minutes, Your Honor.
Let's reconvene now. Let's bring the jury back at 9:30, and we'll start at 9:30. Yeah. This is your copy, Mr. Nelson? All right. We'll reconvene at 9:30. Anything else that we need to go over? All right, we're off the record then. Does the state have an additional witness?
Your Honor, the state of Minnesota rests.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson, are you ready to proceed? Call your first witness.
Your Honor, the defense calls Scott Creighton.
Your Honor, prior to the testimony, we request the cross-jury.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Have a seat. I have to delay just a little bit. Having trouble getting the computer to work, and there's something I have to read the jury, but you can be seated. All right. Hold on. Let me try and. My apologies. Hold on. All right, let's have you give your first, middle, and last name and spell each of your names.
My name is Scott Robbie Creighton, Creighton.
Members of the jury, you are about to hear evidence of an occurrence involving George Floyd on May 6th, 2019. This evidence is being admitted solely for the limited purpose of showing what effects the ingestion of opioids may or may not have had on the physical well-being of George Floyd. This evidence is not to be used as evidence of the character of George Floyd. Mr. Nelson.
Mr. Creighton, by whom are you currently employed?
Your Honor, is there any way that we can, I could hear it a little louder? Could it be a little louder? I'm having difficulty. Sorry about that, sir.
No problem,
I
sir.
just want to make sure I hear all the questions.
Is that better?
Yes, it is.
Okay. By whom are you currently employed?
Right now, I'm currently retired. I'm not employed by anybody.
Prior to your retirement, by whom were you employed?
The City of Minneapolis Police Department,
And how long did you work for the City of Minneapolis Police Department?
28 years.
Can you describe for the jury generally the various roles that you had for the Minneapolis Police Department?
Yes, I will. I started in 1993. I started on the street working as a 911 responder. I did 6 years as a 911 responder, and then I transferred over to public housing for approximately 9 months as public housing officer. And then from there I went to the 4th Precinct and became a community response team member, involved as a street level narcotics investigator. I did that for 22 years.
All right. Now, were you on duty on May 6th of 2019?
Yes, I was.
If you had an opportunity to review various police reports and body-worn cameras from an incident on that date?
Yes, I have.
On that date at approximately just before 5 o'clock p.m., did you execute a traffic stop of a red Ford Explorer?
Yes, I did.
And did you approach the passenger side?
Yes, I did.
Can you describe just very briefly the initial interaction that you had with the passenger of that vehicle?
I approached the vehicle on the passenger side. The passenger window was down. I started giving the individual that was in the passenger seat commands several times. The passenger was unresponsive and non-compliant to my commands. I then had to physically reach in because I wanted to see his hands, because I couldn't see his hands. I reached in finally and grabbed his hand to put it up on the dash, and then that individual was taken from the vehicle and handcuffed.
Okay. Did you make any observations as to the passenger's behavior?
Could you repeat that question, sir? I'm sorry.
Did you make any additional observations as to the passenger's behavior?
Yeah, in my mind, his behavior was very nervous, anxious.
I will withdraw that question. In terms of, did you see the passenger do anything physically with his hands?
Yes, he turned away from me towards the driver's seat as continually as I was giving him commands to see his hands.
Did you draw your service weapon?
Yes, I did.
Did you observe the passenger put anything in his mouth?
Can you say that one more time, sir? I'm sorry.
Did you observe the passenger put anything in his mouth?
No, I didn't.
Did you, were you wearing a body-worn camera issued by the city of Minneapolis on that day?
Yes, I was.
And have you had an opportunity to review your body-worn camera prior to today's testimony?
Yes, I have.
Your Honor, based upon the order, I would move to admit and publish Exhibit 1051.
All right. 1051 is received, subject to the motion in limine.
If we may publish.
Can you undo your seatbelt, sir? Sir, passenger, can you undo your seatbelt? Go ahead and undo your seatbelt. I don't plan on shooting you. I'm just saying, just take your time. Okay, relax. Just undo your seatbelt. Let her take care of her guy. Just keep your hands out where I can see him. Hey! Let me... Keep your hands where I can fucking see him! Okay? Put them up on the dash. Put them on the dash. I'm not going to shoot you. Put your hands on the dash. Put your hands on the dash. The last time I'm going to tell you that. It's simple. He keeps moving his hands around. He won't listen to what I have to say.
Put your hands
Okay?
on your head.
Put them on your head.
Top of your head. Okay, man. Open your mouth. Spit out what you got. Spit out what you got. I'm going to tase you. Spit it out. He's eating all
Don't you jerk away from me.
Put your hands behind your back.
That was one yellow pill, boss.
Okay, now slowly come on out.
Hand under
Now put your
Hand under your hat.
Okay, relax then.
got beat up and everything before, man. You're not going to get beat up or nothing. You just follow what we're asking you to do. I apologize to him, man. I apologize, man. I apologize. Yeah.
Your Honor, may we have a sidebar?
Did you subsequently identify the driver of the, or excuse me, the passenger?
Yes, I did.
And who is that?
Mr. Floyd.
Your Honor, based on the court's ruling, I have no further questions for this witness.
Cross-examination.
Your Honor. Good morning, Officer Creighton.
Good morning.
You testified that you were the officer who approached the passenger side of the vehicle. You approached George Floyd on May 6th of 2019, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And you had your gun drawn when you approached Mr. Floyd, isn't that right?
Yes, I pulled it, yes.
And when you approached Mr. Floyd, he said, "Don't shoot me, man, I don't want to get shot," right?
Something like that, yes.
You told him to undo his seatbelt, correct?
That's correct, yes, ma'am.
And he did that, right?
Yes, he did.
And then you said, "Put your hands where I can see them," correct?
Yes.
And then he put his hands in the air?
Yes,
And then you told him to put his hands on the dash, is that right?
that's correct.
And that was when you grabbed his hand and forcibly put it on the dashboard of the vehicle, correct?
Fallen, yes.
And then the other officer with you on the other side of the vehicle changed that to put your hands on your head, correct?
That's correct.
And then he put his hands on his head, right?
That's correct, yes.
And there was one officer who said that they were going to tase him, right?
That's what I heard, yes.
And you were yelling pretty loud, correct?
Yes, I was, yes. It escalated real quick.
Some profanity as well, correct?
Yes.
And you had your gun drawn the whole time you were giving commands, right?
Once I started ordering him and he refused to show me his hands, yes, eventually it escalated where I pulled my gun, yes, ma'am.
And he was awake, correct?
What's that, ma'am?
Mr. Floyd was awake. Was he awake during this incident?
Yes.
He was conscious?
Yes.
He didn't appear to be in medical distress to you when you were pulling him out of the car, is that right? He was talking to you, he was standing up, is that right?
I don't know if it was specifically, sometimes he was talking, sometimes he was mumbling. He was incoherent in my mind a lot of the time during there.
But you got him out of the car and you handcuffed him, right?
That's correct, ma'am.
And he stood next to the car, right?
Yes, ma'am.
He asked you not to beat him up, correct?
That's correct, yes.
He was able to walk, right?
Yes, he was.
He continued to talk to you.
Yes.
Technology is not our friend today. Ms. Aldridge, if you would.
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer Creighton, you were describing that you got Mr. Floyd out of the car, correct?
Yes.
And he stood next to the car and you handcuffed him, correct?
Me and another officer had to physically handcuff him, yes.
And he didn't fall down, correct?
No, he didn't fall down.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Anything further?
Officer Creighton, there was another officer on the driver's side dealing with the driver,
Yes, that's correct, actually two.
and that officer was speaking to or giving commands to the driver
That's correct.
simultaneous to the time that you were giving commands to Mr. Floyd.
That's correct.
Did you hear the officer say, "Spit it out"?
I may have, yes. You'd have to see the video, and if that's what the video shows, then that's what occurred.
Okay. I have no further questions.
All right, anything further?
Officer Creighton, you were just asking questions about what the other officers were doing. You were interacting with Mr. Floyd, correct?
Yes,
And while you were interacting with Mr. Floyd, he didn't collapse on the ground, correct?
wait a minute. What was the question? Can you speak up a little louder, ma'am?
While you were interacting with Mr. Floyd, he didn't collapse on the ground, correct?
No, he did not.
Well, the answer is stricken. The objection is sustained.
You were asking questions about what the other officers were doing, correct?
That's correct.
Your attention was focused on Mr. Floyd, correct?
Yes, it was.
And Mr. Floyd didn't drop dead while you were interacting with him, correct?
No.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Anything further?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, at this time, the defense calls Michelle Mosing.
You can just stand right there for a second. Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth and nothing but the truth? Have a seat. And before you begin, if you could state your full name, spell each of your names, and then hold off, Mr. Nelson. Just give your full name and spell each name.
First name is Michelle, Michelle. Last name is Mosing, Moseng.
And if you're comfortable taking off the mask, I pretty much leave it up to you, but if that would make it easier to hear you, that would be appreciated. Members of the jury, this again is regarding an incident or an occurrence involving George Floyd on May 6, 2019. As I told you before, this evidence is being admitted solely for the limited purpose of showing what effects the ingestion of opioids may or may not have had on the physical well-being of George Floyd. This evidence is not to be used as evidence of the character of George Floyd. Mr. Nelson, you may inquire.
Thank you. Good morning, ma'am.
Morning.
By whom are you currently employed?
I am retired.
Okay. Prior to your retirement, where were you employed?
I was a paramedic at Hennepin County Medical Center EMS.
How long were you a paramedic for Hennepin County?
Just under 34 years.
Okay. And can you describe the education that you had to become a paramedic?
I have a 2-year degree in emergency medical care and rescue from Mankato State, and then actually got an additional registered nursing. Graduated from St. Mary's University in '91.
Okay. And so you worked as a paramedic for Hennepin County for the entirety of your career, or did you have other employment?
I actually worked for a year in Dakota County for 1 year, and then I have worked at Hennepin, or had worked at Hennepin ever since.
fair to say you've gone to a large number of calls during the course of your career.
Yes.
All right. And you may not remember every specific detail about every call, correct?
No.
And as a paramedic, do you maintain records about each call that you go to in order to assess the patient's care?
Yes, we do a run sheet or a patient medical record that we hand off
Okay.
at the emergency room.
Now,
If you can just speak up just a little bit.
Sorry.
prior to your testimony today, have you had an opportunity to review a run sheet from May 6th of 2019 involving George Perry Floyd?
Yes.
Do you recall all of those details off the top of your head now?
No.
All right. Now, in terms of your recollection of May 6th of 2019, were you summoned to the Minneapolis Police Department
Yes, precinct 4.
to attend to Mr. Floyd?
Yes.
Upon arriving at the 4th precinct, did you talk to Mr. Floyd?
Yes.
Did you learn information from Mr. Floyd about what he had consumed and the time frame he had consumed it in?
Yeah, it was quite hard to assess him. He was upset and confused. Some of the things he said were...
I'm going to strike the answer as non-responsive. If you could perhaps lead.
Certainly. Did Mr. Floyd, were you able to learn that Mr. Floyd had consumed some narcotics that day?
Yes.
What did he tell you specifically about what narcotics he had taken and when he had taken them?
He told me that he had been taking multiple, like every 20 minutes, and it was a I don't remember if it was Oxy or Percocet, but it was a opioid based. It wasn't real consistent with his behavior. At that point, it was real elevated and agitated.
No, I'm gonna.
The last statement about agitation is stricken as non-responsive. You can just wait for the next question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But he had informed you he had taken some sort of an opioid every 20 minutes or something like that, correct?
And then another one as the officer came up.
Okay, so he told you that he had taken a pill at the time the officers were apprehending him.
Correct.
Did you do a physical assessment of Mr. Floyd at that time?
Yes.
Specifically, did you take his blood pressure?
Yes, I took a set of vitals.
Would you agree that your first vitals were taken at approximately 1:34 and 59 seconds?
Without looking at the run sheet, I wouldn't know for sure.
Would it refresh your recollection to review the run sheet?
Yes.
May I approach the witness room?
Thank you. Okay, I've written on here that, yeah, it was 1334 was the first recorded vital signs.
That refreshes your recollection?
Yes. Did you need it back?
Probably will review for the moment.
I'd like to testify from memory. If you need to refresh your memory with that, just let us know and we'll allow you to refresh your memory. But otherwise, testify to your memory as best you can.
Okay.
Thank you.
At approximately 13:34, that's 1:34 p.m., agreed? You took his vitals, correct?
Correct.
And that would include his blood pressure at the time?
Yes.
And did you record what his blood pressure was at that time?
Yes, it was 216 over 160.
Did you ultimately make recommendations to transport Mr. Floyd to the hospital?
Based on that and other issues.
Okay. And ultimately, was he brought to the hospital?
Eventually.
All right. I believe that's all I have, Your Honor.
Ms. Eldridge.
morning, Ms. Mozang.
Good morning.
You provided treatment to George Floyd on May 6, 2019, correct?
Correct.
Is that
Yes.
right? And you were concerned about his blood pressure at that time, correct?
That was one of the things.
And in the course of your treatment of him, he explained that his high blood pressure wasn't something new, right?
Yeah, initially, he denied medical issues, but then when I discovered his blood pressure, I specifically asked again, and he said yes, he had history of hypertension and had not been taking his medication.
And he said he hadn't been taking his blood pressure medication for months, correct?
Correct.
And he told you that he swallowed some pills, right?
Yes.
Approximately 7 Percocet, correct?